Welcome back, everyone. I'm Carrie Johnson of Star Crow Astrology, and I'm making this video today to talk about Jupiter in Gemini. So Jupiter went into Gemini back on May 26th of 2024, and Jupiter will be in Gemini until June of 2025. So Jupiter in Gemini is a big piece of the astrology that we will be under the influence of until early next summer or late spring. So Jupiter in Gemini, it's a big piece of the astrological picture for the near term. And Jupiter in Gemini, what I want to do is talk about the archetypes and what we get when we put these two archetypes together. And then I'm going to show you the major aspects that Jupiter will form to Saturn and the outer planets as it moves through Gemini. And those aspects really summarize what we can expect from Jupiter over the next 12 months. So before I get into that material, I want to let you know that my next 13-month apprenticeship is up on my website at starcrow.com. If you want information on that course, just go to the course listing. So this 13-month apprenticeship starts with Module 1. That's where I teach all of the foundational principles for learning astrology, right? And it's also the narrative pieces of astrology. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and evolutionary astrologers are really known for our ability to tell a really good story. So this is where we get into the storytelling piece of astrology. And the second module is where I teach chart synthesis. So it's one thing to be able to say, you know, the sun in Virgo means this, Saturn in Leo means this. But with chart synthesis, what we learn how to do is figure out what the whole chart is saying. We learn how to synthesize the entire chart using narrative analysis. And then in the third module, we get into transits and synastry. So transits, of course, are when we look at what's popping in the chart right now, right? So the assets and liabilities of any given time, that's transits, right? What's happening now. And synastry, of course, is relationship astrology. And transits and synastry have something in common. In a sense, it's the same skill with different applications. Synastry, it's kind of like that other person is a permanent transit of our chart via the day that they were born. So my child permanently transits my chart from her birthday, right? So it's two different kinds, or permanently activates my chart through her birthday. It's like she's the embodiment of that day, permanently activating my chart. So anyway, if you want to check out that course, it is at starcrow.com, and it is sliding scale to make it accessible. So there are 3 different price points, and which hopefully makes it accessible to everyone who wants to take the course. So you can check it out at starcrow.com. So Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter, of course, is the biggest planet in the solar system. It's so much bigger than any of the other planets. And Jupiter is the planet through which we expand. Jupiter is where we need to go, both in our natal charts and via transit, when everything is hard and when all seems lost and when our faith in life is lost. We need to go to Jupiter and do Jupiter, right? Jupiter is the planet of blessing. The ancient astronomers referred to Jupiter as the greater beneficent. Venus, of course, was the lesser beneficent. And Jupiter, Jupiter brings its blessing wherever it goes in astrology. So Jupiter is the planet that has to do with faith and faithfulness and restoring our faith in life. And Jupiter problems are the kinds of problems that we get into when a good thing, because Jupiter is a good thing, becomes too much of a good thing, right? And we can kind of dissipate our vitality through just too much Jupiterian kinds of activities. So that's Jupiter. Now, Gemini is the sign of the twins. So the glyph or the symbol for Gemini is the Roman numeral 2, and that symbolizes the back and forth communication, the back and forth chitter chatter of the twins. I like to say that Gemini has to do with sitting or being on the sheer edge of reality as reality reveals itself. Gemini is about our thinking, our perception, our communication. And Gemini wants more stimulation, experience. And because Gemini is such an inherently curious sign, Gemini people, they tend to know at least a little about a whole lot of things because they're so curious. And the Gemini, when they're interacting with someone, a Gemini person can figure out pretty quickly, oh, this person I'm talking to is a so-and-so kind of person. I have a file on that in my head, and I can pull that file out and meet them where they would like to be met, right? And I like to think of Gemini and that skill set in particular, the ability to recognize what the other person wants to talk about and the social savvy to know how to discuss what the other person is interested in. I like to think of that as hospitality of spirit. The Gemini is really happy to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about, you know? And there's a skill set to that too, knowing a lot about or at least a little about so many different things, and maybe the curiosity to enough curiosity if they don't know a whole lot about it, enough to be conversational, they can BS their way through it because there's some social savvy with this one. So that's Gemini. And Gemini, ultimately, the archetype is about the joy of the relativity of any truth. Gemini is really about through just experience, being in the mental state or state of consciousness that it's all true. And isn't it wonderful that it's all true, right? So Gemini, when we put Jupiter in Gemini, there's this expansion through the realm of ideas, right? Expansion through being able to hold two thoughts at the same time, right? Jupiter in Gemini. We could even say Jupiter is a planet that can correlate to healing. The healing comes in through being able to hold two thoughts at the same time, two truths at the same time, through knowing that any perspective is relative, right? That's Jupiter and Gemini. And I will also say that Jupiter does not totally love being in the sign Gemini because Jupiter rules the sign Sagittarius. So when planets rule signs, and when we say that a planet rules a sign, that sign is the sign that has the most natural affinity with whatever the planet is about, right? So Sagittarius is where we go on the quest to find our personal truth. Jupiter, it has to do with our philosophy of life and where we restore our faith in life. And Gemini is 180 degrees opposite Sagittarius. So when Jupiter is in Gemini, that's the place that is the farthest away from home for Jupiter. So Jupiter is said to be at its detriment or in its detriment in the sign Gemini. Because Gemini is so different than Sagittarius, it can be hard for Jupiter to stay authentic, to really stay authentic and to fully express what it's about in Gemini. So Sagittarius is really big picture. Jupiter is big picture. And in Gemini, Jupiter can really get lost in the details, maybe miss the forest for the trees, because Gemini is so about all of the details, right? And Gemini, when Gemini isn't functioning well, it being an air sign and so curious and so loving of information and stimulation, Gemini, when it's not functioning well, it can spin out. So if you put Jupiter, the planet of expansion, in Gemini, there can be a tendency to spin out. And it's just, oh, the ideas and the stimulation, it's just too much. However, so when we say that a planet rules a sign, that sign is its domicile, right? So Jupiter rules Sagittarius. The opposite sign is its detriment. So Jupiter is at its detriment in Gemini. However, Jupiter is still Jupiter. It's still the planet of blessing. And I will also say that Jupiter in Gemini is really a sweet combination to me. I started studying astrology when Jupiter was in Gemini, and that was also the last time Jupiter was in Gemini is when I had my child. I started studying astrology because I wanted to read her chart when she was born. And Jupiter in Gemini, it's so brilliant. It is a brilliant, brilliant signature. And I see that brilliance all over my little Jupiter in Gemini. She taught herself to read before she went into kindergarten. That is so Jupiter in Gemini, that really strong intellect. So let's take a look at the major aspects that Jupiter will be forming as it moves through Gemini. I'm going to share my screen for this one. And I am using astro.com. I just really like this free software, and I like it for screen sharing and showing people what I am looking at because the image isn't grainy. So the first thing, so with these aspects, the major aspects that Jupiter is going to form to Saturn and the outer planets, they kind of summarize, they have a way of summarizing the major high points in the astrology over the next 12 months. So of course, as Jupiter moves through Gemini, it will aspect all of the outer, Saturn and the outer planets, right? And Saturn and the outer planets, those planets in particular, they're the ones that have a lot of oomph, right? Those are the planets that really describe the epic that we are living in. So Jupiter is going to form aspects to the inner planets too, but they don't carry the same amount of weight as Jupiter's aspects to the outer planets. So check this out. This story really begins with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and this happened back on April 20th. And of course, this is at 21 degrees of Taurus. This is 1 month and 6 days before Jupiter went into Gemini. But this aspect in particular, Jupiter and Uranus, and I'll say more about this in a future video, but these two planets together, I really see these as a story of progressive corruption and governmental corruption over time. Now, when Jupiter and Uranus conjoined on April 20th, you might recall that Congress authorized yet another massive funding bill for Ukraine, right on the day that this conjunction happened. And that was also the weekend that the college protests demanding divestment from all of our wars, essentially colleges divesting from the military industrial complex. That started the weekend that these two planets conjoined. So I see this conjunction cycle as having to do with progressive corruption over time. And of course, Uranus in Taurus and Uranus in the last 10 degrees or the last decan of Taurus really is where we see the breakdown of an old economic system, and put Uranus and add Gemini to that Uranian energy breaking down the system, and that Jupiter is just going to throw fuel on the breakdown that's so a part of Uranus at 21 degrees of Taurus, or in that last decan, that last third of Taurus. So this is right before Uranus goes into, or right before Jupiter goes into Gemini, of course. So we've got this signature breakdown in the old world order, breakdown in the old economic system, and in your face corruption story with Jupiter conjoining Uranus prior to moving into Gemini. So now we have the next aspect to an outer planet. And notice that Jupiter is now at 29 degrees of Taurus. And I just want to note this. So as Jupiter is just about to move into Gemini, Jupiter forms a sextile to the planet Neptune. And Neptune is so wild this entire summer. On May 3rd, Neptune got up to 29 degrees of Pisces. And that is the last, kind of in air quotes, degree in the entire zodiac. So of course, the zodiac is a circle. Circles have no beginning, circles have no end. But the cycle really starts at 0 degrees of Aries. That is where something comes out of the primordial void, right, of Pisces. That's where something emerges from nothing, 0 of Aries. And 29 of Pisces is the most non-dual, the most transcendent, the most no-thing degree in the entire zodiac. So something emerges at 0 Aries and goes around the entire 360 degrees of the zodiac, and 29 of Pisces is the wildest, most magical, mystical degree in the entire zodiac, where we have absolutely nothing, right? It is non-dual, it's non-duality. And it's about transcendence. And it's just so wild to me to have Neptune kind of stalled at 29 degrees of Pisces from May 3rd, right? Neptune got up to 29 of Pisces on May 3rd, and Neptune is going to be right here at 29 of Pisces until September 3rd, when Neptune will retrograde back to 28 of Pisces. But it's just so trippy, right? We've got this really big theme in the collective right now about transcendence with Neptune at 29 of Pisces. And everyone is talking to me, my clients, my students, all of the folks who come and hang out at my Moon Club on Thursday. Everyone is talking about transcendence, right? And spiritual awakenings are so a part of the zeitgeist right now with Neptune at 29 Pisces. So right before Jupiter went into Gemini, Jupiter formed this sextile to Neptune. So we have this signature. First, Jupiter conjoined Uranus. So that's breakdown in the old world order. And now we have Jupiter sextiling Neptune back back around May 23, right? Right before it went into Gemini. And we have this signature that has to do with transcendence. We've got the breakdown and the transcendence. So the next really interesting thing that Jupiter did is that as it gets to 0 of Gemini, it's now trining Pluto. So, and this was back on May 26th. So right when it goes in. And it really was within orb for, a week or so, a couple of weeks. So Jupiter is now trining Pluto at 1 of Aquarius. And if I mention Pluto in Aquarius, all of you know what Pluto in Aquarius is about. And it is about the breakdown, essentially. Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008. And Capricorn correlates to the systems and the structures of safety and security. It correlates to our structures of governance. So since 2008, fall of 2008, Pluto has been moving through Capricorn, and we've really seen Pluto brings death to what no longer serves. And it certainly seems like our systems of government are not working in the way that they did prior to Pluto's transit through Capricorn since 2008. When Pluto went into Capricorn, incidentally, we immediately saw the 2008 financial crisis, right? And it kind of just got wilder from there through COVID and the aftermath of COVID. So we have Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius now. And Pluto, of course, will retrograde back into Capricorn one last time this summer and fall before moving into Aquarius for the third and final time in November of 2024. And Pluto will be in Aquarius for 19 years once it goes in for reals in November. So you can see we've got Jupiter now sextiling Pluto. And I love this signature because what Jupiter is saying is that, okay, all right, we can feel the breakdown we can feel the systems break down all around us, and the populace is awakening. Pluto in Aquarius does have revolutionary kinds of fervor, and the stress is high. The stress is quite high in the realm at the moment, and it will be quite high for the long term. But Jupiter, the planet of blessing and trine to Pluto, is really saying that there is potential for rebirth and healing. We can hold two thoughts at the same time, right? With Jupiter and Gemini. And Jupiter is where we go. When Pluto in Aquarius just seems too hard and too heavy, oh, well, let's go to Jupiter. Where is Jupiter? In Gemini. Okay, so the world seems to be on fire. That's one thought. And another thought, I can also see that there's a massive awakening that I'm hearing people talk about. So two things, and that I'm experiencing in my own life as well. So Jupiter and Gemini can hold two thoughts at the same time, right? Things seem to be grim on the ground, and yet there is this new consciousness coming in. Jupiter and Gemini is really wanting to point us toward the new consciousness that is coming in, point us toward being able to hold two thoughts, two realities at the same time. So let's go to the next one. This is July of this year. And let me see, okay, so Jupiter in this one, I love this. I love it when planets do this. So in July, and I have this pulled for the second week of July, Jupiter is going to trine the south node and sextile the north node. So now we're coming off of this Jupiter trine Pluto, right? And that there's being able to hold two thoughts at the same time is part of the gift, the blessing, the hope, right? We have two realities at the same time. And now Jupiter, by the middle of July, is sextiling the south node and trining the north node in Aries. And this one is really about a new sense of self being born. The North Node in Aries is a new self being born. It's a more authentic self. It's a more empowered self. It is a more fiery kind of self that's really unwilling to do the kind of, with the South Node in Libra, we're really being asked to outgrow patterning where we suppress the work, the real work of relationship, right? And it's South Node in Libra, it's really asking us to look at ways in which we can favor maybe a harmonious, superficial getting along while at great cost to us, burying all of the issues that it really takes talking about to really truly get along with other people, right? It's kind of about self-sacrifice in a sense, the South Node in Libra, and martyrdom even, and suppression, and valuing this kind of superficial accord at great cost to our well-being, right? So we're being asked to outgrow that right now, to release that old patterning with the North Node in Aries and to become more authentic. So many relationships changing form as the nodes have been in Libra and Aries. So Jupiter is now sextiling by the middle of July, the North Node. And there's something about this ability to hold a new thought that's wanting to pivot us toward the North Node of the Moon in Aries. And we're always, always, always trying to evolve toward the North Node, both in our individual charts and via transit, wherever the transiting North Node is. So then we get a major aspect in August, and that's Jupiter square Saturn. So you can see Jupiter is here, square Saturn. And this aspect is going to hold for most of August. It's going to hold within a degree for most of August. It will be within orb. You could give it an 8-degree orb of influence for even longer than that. But the exact aspect holds for most of August. And we're going to have 3 passes of this aspect. So the first pass is in August. Jupiter will station retrograde and give us a second pass in December. And the third and final pass is in June of 2025. So when Jupiter and Saturn come together, there's a nickname for this one. It's referred to as the interregulum. So the interregulum, of course, is the space between the reigns of 2 kingdoms, or 2 kings, 2 queens, 2 royals. So Jupiter is the new king, the new royal, the heir to the throne, and Saturn is the old king, the old way, the old order. So Jupiter is the new, Saturn is the old. And the interregulum, this one's called the interregulum. It's the space between these 2 reigns, when there's a saying for it too. The king is dead, God save the king. So the old king is dead, Saturn is the old king. Jupiter is the new king, the new way, the new order. So God save the new king. But there's a space between the reigns of the 2 kings after Saturn is dead, right? There's space between when we really know who this new ruler is. We could also say the old world order is dead, and it takes some time before we can really see what the new world order is. So this conjunction, of course, occurred back at winter solstice in December of 2020. And many of you will remember watching this conjunction. It was so gorgeous. You could see it all summer. Jupiter applied conjunction, right? Jupiter was chasing behind Saturn in the night sky. And then in December, we had the conjunction. It was low on the western horizon, just after sunset. It was about 60 degrees above the western horizon. And it was absolutely gorgeous, as many of you will remember. And the conjunction happened at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So this square, the square that starts in August, is the first time that we see these 2 planets in conversation again. Of course, there's been a semi-sextile and a sextile, but this is the first major aspect between these 2 planets. And squares, these 90-degree angles, this is a hard aspect. It's like whatever was planted back at that conjunction. Conjunctions are always a seed planting of a new phase, right? A new Jupiter-Saturn phase. It's the first time that those 2 planets are in conversation again. And it's when you have a square, a 90-degree angle, it's like you've got a righty and a lefty sitting next to each other at the dinner table, and they're elbowing each other because there's just so much tension. They've planted this seed, and now the theme of whatever was planted is in tension. So what I'm expecting to see at this square, I think that, let's see where Uranus is in this one. So Uranus is now at 27 degrees of Taurus. Mercury is retrograde at this square in Leo. I personally am expecting to maybe see shakeups in global finance with this particular square. So remember that this new seeding of Jupiter, Saturn, It happened at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So there's something about the new order that comes from a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that is Aquarian. And of course, that's the planting of two planets or the seeding of a conjunction. That 0 degrees of Aquarius, it stays active. That 0 degrees, it stays active where the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happened. And now we have the planet Pluto, the first major planet to come back through 0 degrees of Aquarius, is waking up that spot that the conjunction happened. So we've got these questions, right? We've got an old order that is dying. We have a new order that is being born. Who is the new order? We have these two planets in square, and I think we're going to start to see who the new king is. Now, when I go back to that conjunction or when I go back to the conjunction in late winter of it was December, so late 2020. It's kind of the beginning of winter. Late 2020, some of the major things that I associate with that conjunction that happened, in the months following the conjunction. For starters, we saw the Canadian trucker protests, which were such a successful movement around, or such a successful protest movement that was really about freedom of movement, right? These truckers did not want to be mandated to have vax passes that would say whether or not they could, they were in their trucks, they were mostly all vaccinated, but they were protesting against control of movement via vax passes. So that was a very successful protest until the Canadian government came in and seized the protesters' assets. And they used very Aquarian methods to seize their assets. They went in and shut their bank accounts down, right? Because everything is online and digital. They just seized their assets. They seized their crypto wallets. They seized their insurance for their trucks and shut the protest down, because they literally just kind of starved them out by taking their money. So this is kind of who's the new king, and what is the new king willing to do in order to exert his will on the people, right? I was really watching that protest movement in relation to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of December 2020. The other thing that we saw was the connection between vaccination in the United States and vax passes, right, via a QR code in bigger cities. So I'm just really curious. I'm wondering about, as this square comes in, I'm wondering about continued technofascism, so control of the people through technology. I'm watching that. And I'm also just really aware that as Uranus continues through Taurus, I do expect to see more kind of financial upset. And yeah, Jupiter and Saturn, I think we could see, or I expect to see continued, maybe continued movement toward central bank digital currency, moving from the petrodollar to central bank digital currency. So this is a big one. This is one of the biggest signatures for 2024, this Jupiter-Saturn square. So the next thing we have, of course, and I will not belabor this, but this is the second pass of the Jupiter-Saturn square in December. This is December 24th, 2024. But this square will also hold for most of December. So, who is the new king is the question. What is the new order? And then in May of 2025, Jupiter will square the nodal axis. So by this point, the south node has moved into Virgo, and we have the north node in Pisces. So the nodes are the only thing that is always going retrograde, in astrology. The nodes are always perpetually retrograde. So when the nodes move into Pisces, they're essentially that's where they start their cycle. They're starting an entire an entirely new 18-year cycle once the North Node moves into Pisces. So let's note that. And Jupiter is in Gemini squaring the nodal axis. So squares to the nodes are a really big thing in evolutionary astrology because the planet that is square the nodes, it can either if it's not functioning well, hold us back in the dysfunctional patterning that the South Node is indicating, right? Or if we get that square to the nodes functional, the planet that's square the nodes functional, that planet can help shift us over into the North Node. And we always want to be evolving toward the North Node of the moon. So the North Node in Pisces, it's more of this, okay, the world is on fire. Pisces is about transcending. Pisces is about Pisces is where we let go of our separate sense of ego, separate sense of self, and become merged with the higher realms of consciousness. So Jupiter in Gemini wants to bring in a new thought, a new consciousness, and flip us over to the North Node, which is now in Pisces. It's about transcendence. So the mind and the mind and kind of mental consciousness helping to flip us over into spiritual transcendence. And conversely, if we are not really working this Jupiter in Gemini in our individual lives, it could keep us held in this collective South Node in Virgo. So South Node in Virgo correlates to self-worth issues. It can also be Virgo is the common people, and Virgo can have to do with over/under kinds of relationships where the person in power is holding maybe the person with less power in a subservient kind of status. But I'm wondering about I feel like I have Bob Marley coming into my mind. What's the song about mental slavery? None but ourselves can free our minds. I'm wondering about how bad ideas can help hold us in servitude, whereas getting this really functional Jupiter and Gemini, being on the sheer edge of reality, being able to bring in the higher consciousness can help flip us toward the North Node. South Node in Virgo is interesting in terms of the way that it can be. Virgo can have to do with the common people, and there's potential with the South Node in Virgo. I can certainly work that archetype to think about the relationship between the people, right? And oppression at the hands of the state, right? So there's this room for a new idea to break us through into this state of transcendence with the North Node in Pisces. Lastly, all right, I've got this pulled for June 15th of 2025. Note that we now have Jupiter at 1 degree of Cancer, and look at what it's doing. It is squaring. As soon as Jupiter goes into Cancer, it squares Saturn and Neptune, which will get within it's less than 1 degree of conjunction next summer before Saturn retrogrades. And I believe they get the tightest in August. And I don't recall how tight, but it's less than a degree. I don't remember how many seconds. It's around the middle of next August that they get really, really close. Saturn retrogrades, and the exact conjunction happens in February of 2026. It's one exact pass in February at 2026. And of course, they will conjoin at 0 degrees of Aries. And that is when we will see the new order, like in a really outright kind of way. That is some wild astrology. But as Jupiter moves into Cancer next year, we still have this really fascinating thing going on. Jupiter in Cancer. Oh, Jupiter loves being in Cancer. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. It's the planet of blessing and the sign of the great mother, the great nurturer, the great lover, the great caregiver, right? Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which is to say it's the place that is Jupiter's favorite other than its domiciles, Sagittarius and Neptune. Jupiter actually has two domiciles, Sag and Pisces. Cancer is its other favorite spot. So Jupiter will be in Cancer, and it's going to square Saturn and Neptune at 1 and 2 degrees of Aries. And there's this real tension between whatever it is that Saturn and Neptune are bringing in this early stage of Aries, and it is a brand new order. It is a brand new thing. When Saturn and Neptune conjoin, and that's a 28-year cycle. Actually, it's not 28. I think it's 32-year cycle. They tend to bring in new otherworldly forms of governance, right? That conjunction cycle famously correlates to both the rise and fall of the Soviet Union under Stalin. From 3 conjunction cycles, we see the Bolshevik Revolution, which starts in 1917, under a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And then when Stalin dies and the USSR is reconfigured, that is the subsequent Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And then in 1989, when the USSR breaks up, that's the subsequent conjunction. So that's just to say that we see forms of government that are new and just otherworldly. It can just bring in really strange things from the ether realms, right? Because Saturn brings Neptune is the most ethereal of the planets. Saturn brings things into manifestation. So we get this new forms of government, global government potentially coming into manifestation through Saturn. And 0 degrees of Aries, it's like you can't make this, you just can't make it up. That's the first sign of the first degree in the zodiac. It's like it's a whole new cycle. It's something that we have never seen before. And what is Jupiter saying? Okay, things are stressful on the ground. The way forward is love with Jupiter in Cancer. So those are my high points when I look at Jupiter moving through Gemini over the next year. Those are the high points. And of course, we went through and looked at all of Jupiter's aspects to Saturn, to Uranus, to Neptune, and Pluto, and the nodes, of course. And when we really want to understand the epoch that we are living in, astrologically speaking, we go to Jupiter out, because those are the planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They move so slowly that they correlate to, they describe the epoch that we're living in. So Jupiter in conversation with Saturn out, the planets that are Saturn and out, those are really the high points that we will see as Jupiter moves through Gemini. All right, you guys, thanks for hanging with me. I will be back very soon. I've got another video in the works that I'll be back with very soon. Thanks for hanging out with me. Please put any questions or comments that you have in the chat, and I'll look forward to reading them. Take care, you guys.